Good morning. My name is Paul Mindel. I'm at North Hills Country Club, and I'd like to thank the two guys who are behind the scenes doing all the filming from WiscoGolfAddict. And today is September 28th, and the temperature's about 42 degrees, so we are definitely out here kind of chilling. But today's focus is we're going to work on short game. It's something that I really put an emphasis on when I'm teaching. I would tell you, the audience, that I give an awful lot of short game lessons. But today, I think we're going to spend our main focus on chipping. So we've got a yellow flag that we'll be aiming toward. We'll be hitting a number of different shots from just off the green. And one of the things that I think is really, really important is to be creative and use a number of different clubs instead of falling in love with one club. Well, my favorite club is my pitching wedge to chip with. Well, sometimes that'll work, but I think we'd always prefer to say, what's the best club to use when we're chipping? So that begins with an assessment of the situation that you're faced with. What's the lie? What's the green elevation? Are the greens wet? Are the greens dry? Is the grass cut short? Is it cut long? What about the wind? All those things should be taken into account when we are looking at a shot to determine what's the best club. So today I brought 5 of my short game clubs: my 9-iron, my pitching wedge, my gap wedge, my sand wedge, and my lob wedge. And then I think it's really, really worthwhile to say, you know, we should always at least consider using the putter when we're near the green. So before we get started, one of the things that I think is really, really important, but a lot of people, they don't understand it. When I ask the majority of my students what is bounce on a wedge, they've heard the term, but they don't understand it. So on my 3 wedges, my gap wedge, my sand wedge, and my lob wedge, all from TaylorMade, it does say the different degrees of bounce. So my 58 degree wedge has 10 degrees of bounce. My 54 degree, which is typically referred to as my sand wedge, has 11 degrees of bounce. My 50 degree gap wedge has 9 degrees of bounce. Bounce is a measured angle that is built in by the manufacturer. So when you look at a wedge with bounce, it is how the trailing edge is higher in relation to the leading edge. Bounce is your friend, but you have to understand how it interacts and what it does as far as causing the club to dig into the ground or not. But bounce is a really, really important component of your equipment. Most golf clubs today will say how much bounce there is, but again, most people, they don't know what it does. It controls how much the club digs into either the grass or the sand. But please remember, it's there for a purpose. Best way to kind of look at bounce is to look at a golf club from a face-on view, and you can see how this edge is higher than this, my sand wedge, by 11 degrees. Okay, so right now what I've done is I've selected my 50 degree gap wedge, 9 degrees of bounce, but before I do hit this shot, again, I might step behind it and now say, okay, now I'm trying to put together my plan, my process. What am I trying to do? I've selected the club. I'm going to try and pick a general spot where I'd like the ball to land. And then from there, it rolls. See, so often what people do is they don't anticipate the roll. Maybe they think they're going to fly the ball into the hole. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. In my lifetime, I've flown the ball into the hole twice, but I've rolled the ball into the hole many, many, many times. So you want to have a plan on what you're trying to do. And that plan, process, or recipe begins by starting behind, looking at the situation, and then moving in to say, okay, now I'm going to get set to swing. I view the setup as the preparation before I swing. The better your setup, the better your chances of hitting the shot successfully. there's no guarantee that I'll hit a shot good just because I set up correctly, but I've increased the chance of being successful. So I'm going to go into now how to set up. I've now done the assessment of what I'm trying to do. Now it's time to get set to swing. So number one, our main focus is to try and hit the ball, obviously, on the center of the face. Well, the shot that I'm faced with right now is roughly 20 feet, so it is a-okay. I would recommend it. Grip lower on the club, because so often when people are chipping, they grip way at the far end of the club. You don't need all that swing. So I tend to use my forefinger on my right hand. I put it right at the end of the grip. So in that way, I'm going to be consistent. The next thing that I look to do is ball placement. When I give private lessons to people and they're chipping, so often they have the ball so far forward in their stance, I would recommend, and I think the majority of short game experts around the world would recommend, play the ball back in your stance. Now, to be specific, what I encourage people to do, because in that way you can be consistent, play the ball in line with the middle toe on your back foot. I'm a right-handed player, so my back foot's my right foot. Okay, so right now I've got the ball in line with my middle toe on my right foot. I've gripped lower on the club. When you grip lower on the club, then you're going to be forced to stand closer to the ball. So I've now gripped lower. I'm approximately 12 inches from the ball. One of the things that is really, really important when getting set to chip is that your lead foot be dropped back a little bit. So in golf terms, we're saying that my feet are slightly open. So right now, I tend to say, okay, my feet are about 2 clubs wide. We are not robots. We don't have to be perfect, but we have to be close. So I've got the foot drop back. That helps me to see my line better. But more importantly, by getting this left foot drop back, it clears some room, so I don't have to worry too much about clearing my left hip. It's already out of the way. So the next thing that I do that I think is really, really important, and I'm going to kind of show you a little bit of a side view. When people get set to chip, you want to make the club stand more upright, more vertical, stand the club taller. Because what happens so often when people set the club down and they rest it so much on the heel, they very well might dig the heel into the ground. So when getting set to chip, just make the shaft stand more vertical. That's really, really a good thing. When you're getting set, I would recommend you have about 60 to 65% of your weight on your lead foot. If you set up and your weight is back, the likelihood is you're going to hit behind the ball. Avoiding fat should be the #1 concern. If you hit the ball thin, the ball is at least going to roll straight. If you hit the ball fat, you're going to lose club speed, and then all kinds of bad stuff starts to happen. So the last thing that I would say when it comes to setup is when getting set to swing, from your elbows to your hands to the club head, it forms a lowercase letter Y. So I'm set to swing, elbows, hands to club head, lowercase letter Y. The shaft is leaning a little bit to my left. Shaft's leaning a little bit forward. So we're going to get set to swing in just a minute. To just kind of review a little bit, we've done the assessment of the shot. We've decided what club do we think is best. We've gone through our setup, all those things that I just talked about. Now it's time to kind of look at the shot and say, okay, what do I need to do here? One of the things that I think is so important is that golfers rely on instinct. So often people get so analytical, but to hit this 20-foot shot, I have to take the club back a certain distance. And that distance will help decide how far the ball is in the air, and then how far it's going to roll. So I'm going to get set to swing. I think I've got a good idea in terms of where I want to land the ball. I take the club back, caught it a little bit thin, but I know I can do better than that. Get set. So all I'm trying to do is get the ball close to the hole so I can have a legitimate shot at a one putt. That's the way you measure how successful you are with your short game. If a person says, well, boy, I got a good short game, and then they say, well, I have 5 3-putts in a round. If you have 5 3-putts, you don't have a good short game, because the proximity to the hole is what's going to determine, for the most part, how good you putt. So the first shot I caught thin, it rolled a little bit too far. Second shot, I think all of us would make that putt. I'm about 18 inches away, and I'd say, you know, it was a good shot. So if I had chose to use a different club, then my instinct would be, well, if I'm going to hit the ball a little bit higher, then I'd need a little bit more swing. The length of the swing will have a lot to do with, again, how far the ball goes. Now, so often when I see people chip, they hit at the ball. They hit at the ball. I think in many cases because they're afraid of the ball going too far. One of the things that I really encourage my students to do is when you swing, you want to swing short back, long through. I just call it S to L, short to long. We want the club, as it's coming into the ball, to gather speed. One of the things that I think is changing in short game instruction is getting away from the word accelerate. For many, many years, acceleration was a word that was used, and people would swing the club back and then they'd accelerate. Well, that's impossible. You cannot be predictable and consistent if you get to here and then you give it this quick jerk. So the word that's now kind of beginning to kind of transition is we gather speed. So if I take the club back a little bit farther, I now have the opportunity to gather more speed. If I take the club back, say, to hip high, that's going to result in a longer shot, but I have more time to smoothly gather speed instead of this focus on accelerate, accelerate, accelerate. So I want to make sure, again, when I hit this shot, that I'm further to my left than I went back to my right. So I think it's really important that we give credit where credit is due. I wish I was smart enough to come up with this, but there's an instructor by the name of Clay Ballard. He kind of invented this and he's posted it. I use it all the time. So this is stretchy, what's called thoroughband. Now, in different companies, you want to have this be as flexible as possible. So this is orange. Then there's also a yellow from a different company, as flexible as possible. I think this is a great teaching aid that every golfer, regardless of handicap, regardless of skill, should be using. And this is something that you could be doing during the winter. Again, it's cold out today, but I think in a lot of cases people are already starting to kind of think about next season. So I'm going to just show you how to do this. So you just wrap the club head with this thoroughband. Doesn't matter how many times, 4 or 5, 6 times you wrap it around. Now, you set the club down, and now it's really important that you step on the club, because what you're going to do is you're going to take this piece of thoroughband and you're going to tuck it under your lead arm. So right now, with this amount of tension, I stepped on it so it doesn't slam me in the face, which I've seen people get very close because there's a lot of tension there. So I would tell you that right now, this piece of stretched out rubber is a radius. Now, what ends up happening when done correctly, that radius stays the same. And I'll just approximately say that from my arm to the club head, it's 50 inches. It's 50 inches the entire way. Now, here's what happens with a lot of golfers who are afraid of this shot. They get set, and then they do this. Well, the ability to transfer energy from the club to the ball, it's impossible. You can just see how much they use their wrists and their hands to try and lift the ball into the air. Regardless of what club that you use, the club has enough loft to get the ball in the air. You do not need to do this to help get the ball in the air. But you see, the reason that this happened is because my body stopped rotating. When done correctly, the body has to have some rotation. So right now, my body is rotated. There's been a slight release of weight off my right foot to my left foot. Another thing that happens so often when people are using this and their body stalls, their arms keep going forward and then it loses this connection. So again, Clay Ballard invented this. I use it all the time with my students, and I think they benefit greatly. And again, it's something that you can do during the winter so that next spring your short game's more on track and you're making more one putts. Still the same day, but now the sun's starting to come out, so I've decided to take off my jacket because now we're going to transition to a little different shot. So rather than hitting from the collar from some short grass, now we're going to be hitting from some longer grass. And what ends up happening so often is that when people try to hit this shot, the club digs into the grass before it gets to the ball. And once the club digs in, now your actual club speed does not sync up with what you intended your club speed to be. We always want to try and make sure that we minimize the amount of interference between the club and the ball due to the longer grass. On that shot that I just hit previously where there was basically no grass at all, I wasn't too worried about hitting any grass, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the ball even farther back in my stance, because as I move the ball further back, my risk of grass interference is less. I do have a little bit of a downhill lie, so in this case I want my body to follow the slope of the downhill. So right now I feel like I have even maybe a little bit more weight on my lead foot. Maybe I'm 70-75%, whereas on a flat lie, again, if you're 60-65, you're fine. Now, from a standpoint of technique, again, because of the longer grass, when I swing back, I'm going to activate my wrist. So what I mean by that is your trail wrist, in my case right, the wrist goes into a hinged position, and that brings the club up steeper. As the club comes up steeper, it's going to come down on a steeper, what's called AOA, angle of attack. When you're in longer grass, you might want to hit the ball a little bit higher. The club comes up faster, sooner. I have very limited arm swing. I'll just take a practice swing to begin with. So I know I've got the right club. I believe I've got the right club. I've got my 54-degree sand wedge with 11 degrees of bounce. So my practice swing is going to be, my left arm really goes nowhere, but the club comes up rather quickly, so I can drop the club down on the ball, reduce the risk of interference from the grass. So now it's time to actually hit the shot. So the importance again of having at least a little bit of rotation. And as I rotate into the ball, I'm going to feel a little bit more weight shift onto that front foot. So I get set, my arms are relaxed, I'm looking at where I want the ball to land. Ball went a little bit further than what I hoped. The ball had decent trajectory. Ball's kind of rolling back at me because of the slope of the green. I have a chance of one putting, and that's all we're trying to do. reduce the number of putts by hitting shots. So we're still continuing. We'll kind of call this, say, it's a mini pitch, because when you chip, again, there's really no wrist or hand action, but when you pitch, yeah, the wrist starts to do something. Body has shifted a little bit. There's been a little bit of rotation. Weight shift has increased slightly onto that left foot, and I can really look at those shots and say, you know, the second one went a little bit too far as well, but I try and hold my finish. Something that we call here at North Hills, we call it a North Hills finish. A North Hills finish is we want to learn something from each shot. So if I hold my finish, I can assess what I did and try and learn from it for the future. I have been on this putting green before, and it happened a couple of years ago where I was down on the right side and there was a person up on the left-hand side, and I couldn't quite figure out what they were doing. But finally I did, and I realized they were chipping so fast, they had two balls rolling on the green at the same time. That person was hitting a lot of golf balls, but was really not learning much, because when you're hitting golf balls that fast, there's no tempo, there's no rhythm, there's no timing. You're just hitting a lot of golf balls, you're hitting a lot of shots, but the quality of each swing is very, very suspect. I would much rather have you hit fewer shots, hold your finish, hold your North Hills finish until the ball stops rolling so that you can learn from it for the future. So now we've moved into the bunker, into the sand, and again, it does allow you many choices, but to decide which club is the best, you want to get a feel for the type of sand that you're in. If the sand is real fluffy, then you do want a club that has a lot of bounce. If the sand is shallow, if the sand is wet, if the sand is hard, then you want a club that doesn't have much bounce, because you want that leading edge to come into the sand and penetrate. But right now, the sand that I'm looking at, you can just kind of tell it's dry. The sand over to my left is still kind of wet from last night's mist or dew or whatever it was. So look at the type of sand that you're in, and then from there, that'll help you decide which is your best club. So right now, based upon the shot that I've got, I'm probably 25 yards from the pin. I have a pretty steep lip in front of me. So one of the things that I think is really, really, really important, and I learned this on a Dustin Johnson sand bunker presentation that was being sponsored by TaylorMade, and he said, you know, when I play with amateur golfers, I tell them to open up the club face. And typically, when he sees amateur golfers open up the club, they just go like virtually nothing. Well, when you set the club in the sand, you basically want that club face to be almost pointing towards the sky. So right now, I've got the club face and it's really, really open, and that's okay. So when the club face is open, which would be aimed to the right, then you can aim your body a little bit to the left, so that club face is right, body's left. The sand, there's no stability in the sand, so when you're in the sand, you really want to try and wedge your feet so that your feet and legs remain more stable. So right now I feel stable. Clearly, I'm going to grip down on the club. I want to feel like a little bit more of my weight again is into that lead foot. And then from there, I'm going to lean into it. And then I'd like the ball placement to be a little bit forward, left of center for a right-handed player. Sand. I think it's really important that you just have some priorities, some goals. For most people, they're afraid of the sand. And then because they're afraid, nothing good happens. So when you're in the sand, your first priority should be get the ball out of the sand. Get it out of the sand. Second priority is I want to get the ball in the green. My third priority is I want to get the ball close to the hole so I have a chance of 1 putt or 2 putt. But you know, what I see so often when people are in the sand, if they get set to swing correctly, they take a swing and then their club just stops. Well, if the club stops, the ball probably went about 4 feet, but now it's still in the sand. So I say to people, the follow through is what gets the ball out of the sand. So we're going to get set. You set the wrist, your legs remain stable. If your legs start to move in the sand, all bets are off, bad things are going to start to happen. So I get set, I set the wrist, and my follow through was more than my backswing. Took, I don't know, maybe 10 inches of sand. Based upon the lie that I have, the ball is above my feet, which adds a whole new dimension because now I'm more likely to hit behind the ball. But I got the ball out. I don't know, it's a 2 putt for sure, maybe a 1 putt. So again, I get set, and I think quite often people, they try and make things so perfect. We are not robots. There has to be some window of acceptability. So I get set, feet are wedged. Now, my contact on that shot was really good. I hit it a little bit too far, took a little bit less sand, ball went a little bit further. It was a good shot. It's a very, very tiny green that I'm hitting to. So that follow through is what gets the ball out. And again, it's that same idea of as we come into the ball, we want to accelerate, gather speed into the ball. That's what gets the ball out of the sand. Then we hold the finish. Okay, so quite often, because again, people are afraid, they want desperately to get the ball out, and then their club slows down, and then the ball doesn't go far enough. So something that I do quite often with a lot of my clients, I step on the ball, I push it pretty far down in the sand, and now I say, okay, the only way you're going to get this ball out of the sand is you have to be aggressive. So I get set, the ball's halfway plugged in the ground. Those of you that are avid golfers would refer to this as a fried egg. Okay, so to get the ball out, I have to be willing to commit to this and swing at it with some aggressiveness, with some enthusiasm. So I get set, I take a big swing, I got the ball out, it's on the green, it's maybe 12 feet away. From that lie, I'll take it all day long. I took a lot of sand. You have to. So when you're just practicing and maybe you're not committed fully to the shot, just do this drill, step on it, and say, man, I need to take a bigger swing here to get this thing out. And then I think that will help you when you're faced with a more normal shot from the sand. But these shots will happen on the golf course, but you have to be committed to get this ball out of the sand. I'm very pleased with myself on that last shot. But just know that the ball will come out with very, very little spin, so it's going to roll further than maybe what you think. But got the ball out. Life is good.
Find a way down to...
Okay, so right now, we're going to just be a little bit creative and say, okay, because of the shot that I'm facing, because of the sand that I'm in, I'm going to use my 50-degree gap wedge. The club typically that I would use quite often if I'm in the sand is my 54-degree sand wedge, but you know, sometimes you can use a different club that better suits the circumstance. So I have a big lip here. My 50-degree wedge I still think will get me out, but with this, the ball's just going to roll a little bit more by design. So really, you don't change anything, but you've just chosen a better, different club. Maybe I should use that one all the time. almost chipped it in. So just be willing to try different clubs. I played recently 45 holes up in Green Bay. I think I was in the bunker 5 times. I used my 58-degree wedge twice. I used my sand wedge twice. I used my gap wedge once. And in every case, I got the ball out of the sand. I don't recall how many putts I had, but just be willing to try different shots. I think that's what makes golf so great, to be creative and not just get locked into one club for every shot. We got to make it more fun. What we're going to do is now we're going to just give you a little quick 3-minute summary of some of the key points that we've hit on. Again, my name is Paul Mindel. I'm the golf instructor at Wisconsin Golf Academy. And so we're talking today about short game. Number one, you want to be creative with your different clubs and say, you know what, there's always a best club. You want to assess the lie. So if the ball's sitting here, that's a completely different shot than if the ball's sitting here in the long grass. So then you have to plan accordingly on how you would set up and how your swing would differ based upon the lie. You always need to be assessing the lie before you take your swing. It just will give you a sense of confidence. You'll be able to be a little bit more committed to the shot. But on that short game chip shot, some of the bullet points again, check the ball placement. Again, I recommend that the ball be back in your stance. Arguably, Phil Mickelson is probably one of the greatest short game players in the world, and he will preach constantly ball placement when getting set to swing. So, ball's back in my stance. My feet are narrow. Again, I just like to have about 2 clubs wide. You definitely want to favor that weight onto that lead foot. Whether it's 60, 65, or 70%, you want to keep that weight forward. Gripping lower on the club because you're just hitting a short shot. You don't need to be way at the end. Making the shaft stand a little bit more vertical. It becomes more and more like a putt. When the club is more vertical, it'll allow the club to swing straight or back. The more that the club sits down, the more likely it is to wrap around your body. Now you're making chipping much, much, much more difficult than it needs to be. When you're swinging, you want to be committed to that shot and just say, okay, when I swing through, I want short to long. The length of my backswing is going to impact how far the ball goes based upon what I'm seeing as I observe the green. And then again, just go to that North Hills finish and say, okay, when I hit that shot, I hold my finish until the ball stops rolling. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit from this collar, from the fringe. I've got my 54-degree wedge with 9 degrees of bounce. Really and truly can kind of do a dead hand swing. I really don't need to get my wrists going. So hold the finish, hit a little bit behind it. We'll try it again. As you're trying new things, it's really important that you just be patient and not worry so much about, boy, how did every shot turn out? We want to really be working on our technique first and foremost. My setup stays the same. A little bit better. Ball had some nice spin to it. Contact was really good. Held the finish. Now I'll go to hitting from the longer grass. So now I'll still go to the same target, the same flag. Might move the ball a little bit further back in my stance. I'm going to get the wrist to lift the club up. So the club is coming down a little bit steeper on the ball. Hit a little bit behind it. And if I were practicing or playing, I would certainly be taking a little bit more time between these shots. Get set.